Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of That Millwall Podcast. A bit of a managerial hunt episode of That Millwall Podcast, where today, joining myself and the usual Mr. Frankie Long, is podcast royalty, EFL guru, Gab Sutton, and we'll get his thoughts on the managerial search right after this. Gab, really appreciate you. Welcome to the show. You are a fantasy EFL guru, an EFL guru in general, a podcast guru. You do so much in the EFL footballing world. It's such a pleasure to have you. Thank you for being here. What are you up to, mate? Before we get into the depths of why we're here, I mean, you've got so much that you do. You're always popping up on this show, that show. You're always writing for this, doing for that. Just give us a lowdown of what you're up to, mate, and where everyone can find your content.
Yeah, so I'm an EFL pundit. Basically try and be the Gary Neville of the EFL is the sort of the short version. So that's certainly the aim, whether that comes off. But I have podcast. I write a lot about the EFL. I have podcasts. The championship version of that tends to be on Mondays at 5:30. I've had Nick Hart, who you'll know from the Stung Millwall podcast and fanzine. So I talk about the EFL quite a lot, and obviously cover the championship and including Millwall. So yeah, you can follow me on Twitter for all that kind of stuff at Gab Sutton. Also looking for new subscribers on YouTube at EFL Debate, so you can go and give that a subscribe. We're also on Spotify at EFL Debate as well. So for weekly EFL content, you can go and check that out.
Very busy man, mate. Very busy man. Obviously, before we get into the managerial situation so far, Frankie, it's nice to get someone like Gab's view on how the season's going so far. So take us away, mate. Gab, the season so far for Millwall from an outsider looking in, with so much that you do. We are in the hunt for a managerial search. We'll come to that after. But what is the opinion from the outside in your circles, from what you do involved in the EFL and the Championship especially? What's your view with Millwall and how the season's gone so far and how we look?
Well, I think for Millwall, there's a bottom six. Every season you have a bottom six budget. So any time that Millwall are around mid-table in the Championship, or even being sort of mentioned in the sort of playoff conversation, I think that shows that you're doing something right. I think I'm a big admirer of Millwall, because historically you've been a club that's been able to perform above the sum of your parts because of the atmosphere that you can create at the Den. And I guess sort of leading into the sort of manager vacancy, I think that's going to be a really important thing for the next manager to tap into. And I'd love to sort of hear from you guys about this, about why the last 19 years, let's go since Dennis Wise left, whether whatever you think of the Dennis Wise era, only 3 or 4 managers, I think, have made it work. Kenny Jackett definitely did. Neil Harris definitely did. Go out on paper, you'd say the results were very competitive. I think you had a manager called Willie Donachie in that time who did reasonably well as well. But we're only talking about 3 or 4 managers in 19 years who have made it work at Millwall. And I think it's because it's almost like you need a slightly different criteria to be a Millwall manager as opposed to being a general football manager. And it's why you get managers like Neil Harris, I think, who do brilliant work at Millwall and don't necessarily have their stock in the football world, might not be as high. So I think that's the important thing. And I think Steve Gallen and James Barrelson are going to have to take that very seriously in terms of looking for the new replacement. It's one thing what their CV looks like and what their coaching credentials are, but do they have the aura, the character to be a Millwall manager? I think that's going to be a really important thing in the next appointment.
Yeah, I completely agree, mate. I think as a fan base, we probably appreciate we are quite unique in a lot of ways, and we talk a lot about players being Millwall players. Has a player got the mentality to be a Millwall player? We maybe haven't actually appreciated that's even more so the case probably for a manager. If you haven't got the right mentality and personality, you're going to get eaten alive in that dugout and in them stands. and it could be over before it starts, I think, for some. So, no, they definitely need to get that right, and be really considered with the personality aspect. It maybe even more so in playing style and accomplishments.
Yeah.
Just are they the right fit? Where did you think before the start of the season, mate? Where did you think was going to finish? And is this about where we thought you'd be, or do you think would be worse?
No, I had you a little bit lower, actually. I think I had you about 19th. I wasn't quite sure whether Harris would be able to sustain the form that he enjoyed in the last third last season as well as he did. But again, I think he did some terrific work. I suppose I'm slightly cautious or interested that to ask you guys what your view is on Steve Gallen, because I noticed, and whether I'm reading too much into this, in Neil Harris's statement when leaving the club, he was very praising of James Berylson working with him, but didn't mention Steve Gallen. And do you think I'm right to pick up on that? And what is your view on Gallen as a fan base?
No, I think you're right to pick up on that, and I'll come in quick before Frankie finishes it off. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, me personally, I do like Steve Gallen because I like the direction the club want to go in. It's a modern style of football. It's bringing in young potential players with the potential to sell them on for higher figures. And, we've seen that work really well with clubs like Brighton, Brentford. They've adopted that sort of mantra over the years, and it's worked for them. And I think it is the modern way now to have a head coach as opposed to a manager. And have that sort of director of football-ish role taking over that side of things. I do think that it is probably the biggest reason as to why Neil's not here anymore. I think that Harris is very entwined with being a manager. He likes to have that control. He likes to be, involved in everything. That's his personality. We appreciate that. We love that about Neil. But he just something that probably didn't really suit him. I would say he's a good manager of men, can get you up for a big game. I don't necessarily believe that Neil is a great coach and can coach players.
Yeah.
So I think that was probably the aspect that I wouldn't say struggled to do, just probably struggled to grapple with. And I think that there was, various times throughout the season, there was various comments from Neil and controversies and, statements made that did add fuel to that fire. And it is probably the ultimate reason that he's not here. But this is the direction the club want to go in. Harris knew he was going to be gone at the end of the season. He just chose to do it now for a new manager to get a potential look at January. Frank, what's your thoughts? We have spoke about it, but that's what I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's definitely a factor. I think it's sort of a widely agreed amongst Millwall fans that Neil had a fantastic relationship with the previous director of football, Alex Aldridge, and CEO Steve Kavanagh. They seem to get on really well, sort of professionally and personally. Been together working relationship for years, going back to the first time Neil was at the club. So, I think in that sense, the change for Gallen probably has destabilised things a little bit and probably has made that slightly trickier. Where I'm a bit sympathetic is, in my opinion, the change was inevitable in the fallout of the Joe Edwards situation, and we had to do something different. And they were probably the two people that led to Joe Edwards getting appointed, and then subsequently us falling down the league and turning to Neil Harris to save the club. So I can understand why James has maybe gone in this direction, and I think I think it had to happen. It's just a far cry from what we're used to as a football club, and it's going to take some adjusting for both players, fans, people at the club as well. So, it definitely has an effect. And I think Steve Gallen has potentially probably copped a lot of flack in the last couple of weeks. And the pressure's on him now to get this right, because he's ultimately going to be judged on this.
This will be his job, won't it? It was Aldo's job after Edwards, Gab. It's no doubt it's going to be Gallen's this time round.
Yeah, I think what I'm really struck by is this kind of dilemma that Millwall have is how much do we go down the modernisation route and how much do we stick to our sort of authentic principles? And I think there's a middle ground, really, because I don't think Millwall Football Club can sort of put their blinkers on and say the way we've done it for the last 100 years has to be the way we go forward, because that's not realistic. Like, football evolves. You've got to... So for me, I don't think that the manager being the one who leads the recruitment is sustainable. I think nowadays that having specialised people focusing on recruitment, I think, is a very good thing, because I think that means that the quality of the process is going to be better. And I think trusting communication between manager and recruitment, I think, is the way forward. But I also think that stylistically, and certainly in terms of the core values of a Millwall team, I think that's one of the things that you've got to stay the same. And I think that's something you don't want to compromise on. I don't care what era of football we're talking about. I don't think you can be a Millwall team and be flaky and be soft. And I think you've got to make sure that whoever comes in really actually buys into and shares the sort of the identity of the football club and those core values.
I completely agree, mate. And I think if you look at the best thing Harris has done, he's definitely brought back that Millwallness of a little bit of bite in what we do, and it's a style of football that resonates much more with the fan base, I think, than what we were previously used to under Edwards, which was maybe a little bit too possession based, and Rowett, which was frankly just a little bit dull and boring. So he's definitely struck the balance there, Harris, and whoever we get in next has to build on what he's done rather than
don't reinvent the wheel like Edwards tried to do.
No, exactly that, mate. It's a tough job for me in that sense, because there has to be a fine line between the two. Hopefully there is a bit of a hopefully there is, as you said, hopefully there is a bit of a balance between the two. Otherwise, we're in a sticky situation. Have you watched much of Millwall this season and sort of seen our style of playing that sort of stuff this year?
Well, the big ones that have stood out to me have been Jake Cooper and Jeff at Tanganga. I think two of the best centre halves in the league, and I suppose when they're both fit, that's obviously going to make a difference, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Jeff at Tanganga, to get him in on a free, let alone to get him in at all, is huge. Probably one of the low key signings of the EFL for me. I mean, there was questions over some fluid he had on the knee, a bit of an issue. Teams probably holding off and letting him essentially put himself on trial at Millwall for a future move, because there's no doubt he's much better than not just Millwall but the Championship in general. Fantastic player, and he's been. It's no secret that at the start of the season we lost games and conceded goals without him. We won games with him. He's then since been suspended, and we lost against Coventry, and put in a really good shift when he was back against Sheffield United on Wednesday night. Huge player, mate. And we've got some other youngsters. Romain Esse is someone who's really key. Before Frankie takes you into the next part of the show and ultimately the bulk of the manager hunt, and we dig into that, what is the outside perspective of Romain Esse? Because us as Millwall fans, we're probably pretty good, as most clubs are, at overhyping your own and making them seem better than they are. Is Romain Esse as good as Millwall fans think we are, and as good as Millwall Football Club say he is? Because he's some player at the moment. And if so, who else has kind of stood out to you in that team?
Yeah, well, I think for me, Romain Esse and Femi Aziz are really exciting talents who I enjoy watching. They both travel with the ball well, both very quick. I think both probably will feel like they've got another gear to find, but two very exciting talents, and that's what I like with Millwall, when you've got wide players who can bring that bit of excitement. That always gets people off their seats, doesn't it?
No, exactly. I just want to touch on one last player before I let Frankie loose, and that's the striker position at Millwall was something that has probably hindered us for quite a while. We haven't had a real super threat since we played the two up top in Gregory and Morrison back in the League One days and early Championship days. We brought in Macaulay Langstaff, someone who's scored a hell of a lot of goals in the lower leagues, moved up for the National League, did it again in League Two. He's made that jump to the Championship. Hasn't quite worked out, hasn't really got himself in his groove. What do you think of Macaulay Langstaff? Because we got the young Ivanovic, the Serbian, who we spent a lot of money on. Tom Bradshaw looks like someone who could move out at the end of the season. If we don't bring someone else in, Langstaff's going to have to be that guy. Do you think he can make that jump?
For me, I would love to see him in the same kind of role that Lee Gregory had alongside a target man. I think that
Agree.
Steve Morison was probably a most important player during that successful era because he was actually, for his age, he was fairly mobile and he won so many physical and aerial duels, and it made it much easier for his strike partner. I don't actually know that Lee Gregory was such a prolific finisher. It's just that he did get a lot of knockdowns from Morris. I actually thought Aidan O'Brien was probably a better finisher, but probably didn't do
Fair
the same
comment.
work that Gregory did. And I think Macaulay Langstaff can be, in my opinion, a bit of a hybrid between Aidan O'Brien and Lee Gregory in terms of having Gregory's work ethic, but maybe Aidan O'Brien's finishing ability. But he hasn't had the same opportunities because playing as a lone striker isn't the same as playing with, a target man alongside you. So for me, I think Millwall last few seasons, that's probably the one thing you've missed, having a target man presence. And it's obviously difficult to find somebody who can spearhead attacks, but especially in the modern era where not many centre forwards are built like Steve Morison was. So yeah, that's obviously going to be a challenge, but I think that could go a long way if you could bring in a target man. I think that you'd then see Macaulay Langstaff catch fire and get a run of goals.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. So let's get straight into the bulk of it then. Millwall, Frankie, we are on the hunt for a new head coach in a very busy time. December is a very, very busy time in the EFL. It can make or break seasons. We are in the hunt. Harris has decided to step away to give a new manager a look at the January transfer window, as he says. Let's go with it then. So take it away, mate.
Yes, mate. So obviously the week started with the fairly surprising news that Harris will be leaving his post after the Middlesbrough game. Not something I think many of us expected to be coming. So I'd expect it to sort of maybe caught the club off guard as well. I guess what are your thoughts on that for a start from the outside looking in? I mean, and this is the whole situation. And do you think we could potentially find ourselves in a bit of a spot bothering now?
I think you've already got a healthy points tally. I think 20 points at this stage is a pretty good return. So maybe a few more than that actually. So you've definitely got a good points return. So yeah, I think you're going to be okay, but it's whether you get the next appointment right. And I just hope that you don't go so far down the developmental route that you kind of lose a few of those kind of core principles. So very intrigued to see who you get next.
I think we'll all agree with that, mate. I don't think anyone's after another Edwards debacle, to be completely honest. So hopefully they're a bit more experience. On who we've been linked with so far, the bookies' favourites, and this changes every day. So
yeah,
but so far the favourites have been Mark Robins, Steve Cooper, Matt Bloomfield, and then more recently Ryan Lowe and David Wagner. Do any of them stand out to you as someone that you think you can imagine sitting in the Millwall dugout?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the standout candidate on paper is going to be Mark Robins, but I'm also mindful that after 7 years in one job, it might be one where he could do with a sabbatical. I think for me the most important thing is just kind of character profiling. So you say we want a manager that's going to get us playing aggressive, high tempo football, getting the ball forward early into dangerous areas. Being teams that favouring players that are going to be very aggressive and not afraid of the odd kind of crunching challenge, and really just thinking sort of profiling how we want a Millwall team to look and feel, how we want a Millwall manager, the character and the mentality, and being a bit of a street fighter, a bit of a loose cannon, perhaps, somebody that sort of speaks their minds and kind of basically profiling that way, and actually not being too bogged down by CVs and promotions and coaching pedigree and how high they've worked. It's actually more about the fit for me. And I think that's going to be the most important thing for the search. And I think if I was in Steve Gallen's point of view, I would make that the absolute priority. And then I would actually widen the search pool and actually be open to anything in terms of profile and histories. but I would make sure that they kind of fit that kind of criteria. That's how I think the club should approach it.
Do you think it's an attractive job, Gabe? I mean, we've mentioned the fact that Romain Esse is potentially on the verge of a big move to a Premier League team, perhaps, or somewhere in Europe. We've also got, Zian Fleming is on loan with a obligation to buy to Burnley for an X amount. No, we haven't got a definite figure. But there's definitely money that is coming into the club. It's the closest club to the centre of London. This new sort of regime of doing things. Do you think this is an attractive job for managers?
Sorry, you think there's money coming into the club at the moment then from new investors, or what's
no, sorry. So to reiterate, so we've got Romain Esse, who's potentially going to bring in some money to the club if he gets a Premier League move. Zian Fleming was obviously obligated to buy on loan to Burnley. That's for a substantial figure. So there is some money that's going to be coming into the club that we haven't really had for or ever in the history of the football club. Do you think this is an attractive job in terms of the position of the football club, close to the centre of London, money coming in? Do you think that this is a job that managers will look at and go, actually, I fancy it?
Without sort of repeating myself too much, I think it's all about the fit. I don't think it should be an attractive proposition for a coach that wants to establish themselves playing sort of possession football, because that style of football requires a process if the team and players aren't there already, and that requires a lot of patience. And if the style of football isn't something that fans identify with, then the results had better be there straight away, and the fans probably aren't going to have the patience for that kind of transitional period, and it's just not really going to go well. So I think that it's better for the board to kind of be realistic about that and honest about that, and actually say, you know what, let's embrace what the fans do really want and give them what they do want, because that way, I think if fans see that there's been a team that's given everything, that's put teams under a lot of pressure, and played at a really high intensity, then I think fans will be more forgiving during those bad periods of form, and that's how you can build something that's really sustainable. For me, that's got to be how the board look at it. And then I think, from the outside, I think it's very difficult for somebody who doesn't have necessarily, who wouldn't find it easy to kind of buy into the Millwall ethos. I think that could be a difficult job. So, I think, again, it depends on the sort of the nature of the candidate, really. I mean, can I turn the tables on you guys? How good do you think this squad is? What do you think it's capable of?
I think it's a solid mid-table championship side. Look at some of the sides in the league, and I think we should be good enough to avoid any real significant relegation battle. I don't think we're anywhere near good enough for playoffs. So I think we probably are one of 6-7 sides in the championship that are between that 8th and sort of 18th bracket, where they can finish in any of them. We're all quite interchangeable. So I don't think. I think in that sense, I think it's probably not the most attractive job, but I think there are kind of some extenuating factors of. I mean, it's a really successful youth product at the minute we're producing through, and our academy teams are doing really, really well. I think there's a stat of South East London is like most more professional footballers come out of that part of the world than anywhere else in the world. So in that sense, there are a lot of positives for the role, and I think it's a role where if you have the right personality, there's significant room for growth. So I think in that sense, it probably is quite an attractive role. If you're up for the battle, I guess, and if you're up for the challenge of taking on a club like Millwall, because it's not for the faint of heart, is it? What do you think, Jay?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that you've both said, and it's interesting. Gab mentioned something about fans giving the manager time to produce his ethos and get his his playing style away across. I don't necessarily think it's down to fans anymore. I just don't think clubs give managers time. The finances involved in football now, especially in the EFL, managers don't get a lot of time because the drop off from Premier League to Championship to League One financially is massive. It's monumental. It was huge for us to stay up last year. That's why we let Edwards go. I think if we wasn't in any danger, Edwards would have got a lot more time. I think he was probably the right man at the wrong time. for this football club in terms of how we wanted to go and move forward. But I do think this squad is really good when it's healthy and fit, and we have no problems. We are literally an injury away. Like Cooper is now out. We've noticed the big drop off there.
Do you not think, though, Jay, that if there's a sideways pass at the Den, there's a little bit of for one thing, I've noticed there can be a little bit of a grumble. Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
it's a subtle thing, but I always feel like as a fan base, and this isn't like, because I think that when the flip side of that is when you do see a team that's playing direct and getting after opponents and getting it into the danger areas early, you're as good a fan base as anyone. But I think you've got to have the right style of football, I think is the point.
It's really weird you say that, because at the start of the season, we was kind of gung-ho, Frankie, weren't we? And we was really going after teams, and we were scoring a lot of goals, but we was conceding a lot and we was losing. Mentioned Bristol City was 4-3. Watford at the Den was 3-2. We were sort of that gung-ho. When we sort of revert back to what we did to keep us up last year, that defensive, resolute style, sit off, 11 men behind the ball, 20% possession, hit you on a counter-attack. We actually got more wins playing that way. So I don't necessarily sort of subscribe to a certain style. It's been pretty on the eye. Under Harris, we have been starved of any through ball is kind of like a goal down Millwall, because under the previous regimes, we haven't seen that. It's been very set piece orientated in terms of our attack and slow build up. So Harris definitely brought back some excitement. But yeah, no, it is. You do notice it, and it was very evident Wednesday. I was there Wednesday. Frankie was as well. We was crying out just to put the ball through the middle to the £3 million Serbian international striker, and it was kind of long ball when up to Langstaff and Ivanovic. But if you look at the size of Harry Salter at the back of Sheffield United, didn't really kind of work. Didn't really work for us.
So. Talk about playing to your striker's strengths. I mean, Langstaff scored record-breaking goals, I think, in the National League a couple of seasons ago, top scorer in League Two last season, but it was in a very good footballing Notts County side. So again, it's very situational. Now, again, I think if you've got a target man that can knock it on for Langstaff and get those flick-ons and give him those chances, then I think he can poach for you. I really do. But, asking him to beat Harry Salter in the air is just not going to go well, is it? So you've got to make sure that you recruit players for a very specific role. And I do wonder if, under whether that's necessarily been done so well, because there seems to be a bit of a disconnect perhaps between the players you've brought in and maybe what you're asking them to do.
No, agree.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a bit of that. What I would say on the football side is credit to Harris. I think he has actually improved as a football side this season dramatically. Right. Last season, the football we was at war. We needed what we needed, and it was a bit backs against the wall. But it was turgid at times. This year, we've actually probably got the most amount of success we've had on the floor. Quick interchange of passing, getting the ball wide, and attacking space, being quite direct with it, but sort of 1-2 passing, that sort of thing. Been much more successful than that we have in the past. And actually, when we then go back to almost reverting to type of these long diagonals to a 5'8" striker against 6'4" centre backs, funny enough, doesn't quite work as well. But there has been a bit of a step change in that this season. And whoever we get in, whoever that may be, I think the brief for them needs to be to continue this evolution, because it probably has gone in. Well, not probably. It definitely has gone in the right direction since the start of the season. One of the main reasons you're here, to be honest, mate, is to get your insight and the whole thing, all of the EFLs basically. So we've listed some names that we know the bookies have linked us to, and all the usual suspects in that sense. Is there anyone else in the EFL that you think would resonate with Millwall and be able to succeed in that dugout?
Yeah, what a great question. In terms of managers in League One, you've obviously mentioned Matt Bloomfield. Michael Duff's at Huddersfield. I think he's a very good manager. Didn't quite work out from at Swansea. I don't think the fit was quite right. But I think he's a manager who can get teams playing at a very high intensity. They've always been good pressing sides, whilst being able to create chances and remain solid defensively. Whether you'd be able to poach him from Huddersfield, I'm not entirely sure, but I do rate him. I think Daryl Clarke is the kind of character that would do well at Millwall because he's somebody who speaks his mind, and I think your fans would probably take to him quite well. So I do like Daryl Clarke, but again, it was a case of poaching him from another club, whether you've got the money to pay compensation and that side of things. Yeah, so I think that's the thing. I would say at the moment it's actually, I'm prepared to look a bit further afield and widen the search and look at even on the continent and look at managers that have got the sort of the Eastern Europe, or who's a coach at Atletico Madrid, or somebody that's kind of got a sort of a mentality, a philosophy that kind of aligns with Millwall. That's a really important thing. So for me, I would widen the search and just almost be open to anything, because for me I don't even think that Neil Harris has been really successful at Millwall. I don't necessarily think it's about being an amazing coach. I just think it's about being someone who can bring to life this fan base and make the Den a fortress. And I think that's got to be the first priority.
Yeah, agree. I also think, you look at the approach that clubs have made in terms of managers now. They're kind of going after like these assistants of these bigger managers. You've seen it with Maresca, you've seen it with Arteta. I do like the idea of branching into the European market. There is a lot of managers really sort of testing time at the moment, because you don't expect managers like David Wagner, like Mark Robbins to be available. So, we have got time, we have got a sort of progress in place, because I imagine that with Harris knowing he wasn't coming back next season, this process would have probably been started at the start of the season to an extent. They may have sort of had their boardroom ready, got some names on paper. Maybe Gallen was even out scouting at some games that managers were managing in. We're bound to have an interim. What do you think the timeline for this sort of process is going to look like? I know that, you want to get it right. It takes as long as it takes. But given the amount of names linked with the job, how do you sort of see it with your experience and your dealings with the EFL, that this sort of timeline could normally take for a club?
If I was in Steve Gallen's shoes, I would take as long as it takes to get the right person. If that's 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, obviously results in the interim period is going to be a factor. I would say put some faith in Adam Barrett. He's somebody who's done some good work as a caretaker manager before. I think if you look at the time after Harris left the first time around and before Rowett came in, I think he beat Leeds, didn't he? So I think this is somebody who you can trust. He's been part of the coaching staff for a while. So I think I'd be inclined to say, if I was in Steve Gallen's shoes, presuming Steve Gallen is going to be in charge of this appointment, let's trust Adam Barrett. We've got a safe pair of hands for the interim period. Let's really take a couple of months to drill down on this appointment and make sure, character profile people and get as many references as possible. And then we commit to the right person for Millwall Football Club for the long term, because it's such a niche appointment. You've got to get all the nuances right. And I think a lot of research and preparation has got to go into the appointment. And it takes as long as it takes.
No, I agree. Who's your money on, Gab, with the early bookies favourites? Who's your money on if you're a betting man? Sorry to put a gun to your head there, but
I think no. Well, I'm going to sort of sidestep that a little bit, Jay, because I think a lot of the time it ends up being somebody that the traders or the bookies have never heard of. And for me, it wouldn't surprise me if the club did go down that route, because I think, that's what I think anyway. I think you've got to. I think if you just search from the names that are sort of obvious, I think you limit yourself and you might miss out on the possibility of getting somebody who's perfect for Millwall. And that's got to be what Steve's focus is on.
On that, almost breaking news, 2 hours ago, Football Insider reported an exclusive that Matt Sadler is under consideration for the Millwall vacancy. Obviously, the Walsall boss. I'm going to be completely honest, I know absolutely nothing about Matt Sadler and Walsall. I know top of the league. What's your thoughts on him?
So Matt Sadler's first season at Walsall delivered some competitive results on paper, but there are actually maybe question marks about them as a collective, and there was a sort of a perception that they relied a little bit on the individual quality of Isaac Hutchinson to sort of be in the playoff conversation last season. This season it's been completely different. And I think he's learned a lot from his first year in charge, and they play a 3-1-4-2 formation with really attacking wing backs and 2 aggressive, energetic number 8s and 2 up top as well. So I think in terms of style of play, there could be an alignment there because of they're very much pressing side. They're not particularly possession based. So yeah, I think that could be a decent fit. I think he's a talented young manager. Whether he would turn down the opportunity to try and get a promotion on his CV, but whether he feels like going into the Championship would be too big an opportunity to turn down, because it is very early. You kind of judge him almost on 5 months of good work, and it's quite a short sample size, if you like. Yeah. But no, he's doing some fantastic work this season, so I can see why he'd be under consideration.
It's almost quite similar to the Matt Bloomfield situation, right? Of last season didn't really pull up any trees, but this year it's really stepped on.
Yeah.
I said another name that's been linked, but personally I have my reservations about Matt Bloomfield. I think, one, it's a big change style-wise, and 2, there isn't much behind the CV to suggest that there's any sort of anything to suggest he'll be able to succeed in the Championship or with Millwall.
Well, I think the other thing is I'm not sure he would leave Wycombe Wanderers because he was a player at Wycombe for 20 odd years, and I think there's a club there that I think are going to give him a lot of support.
He's going to end up in the Championship, Gab, as well, ultimately.
Exactly,
yeah. At the moment,
so whether he'd necessarily want to make that jump, that would be a bit of a risk. So there's a question there. So, but yeah, a couple of good contenders, I think.
What would you make of someone like this is a bit out there. No one's linked this, by the way, but it normally comes up with me. What about someone like Steve Morrison? Obviously, done quite a good job at Sutton last year. I know they got relegated, but it seemed like they were relegated before he started. But he's a young up-and-coming manager. He definitely gets the football club.
Yeah, definitely a good character as well.
Do you know what? When Steve Morrison was player at Millwall, I sort of had a feeling that he might be a future manager at Millwall because I could sort of see what. Do you know what? How are Sutton getting on in the National League at the moment? I don't know.
I think that is a great question. He has took a few Millwall players on loan as well, and they've been pretty good.
Yeah, they're into the top 7 in the National League, so it looks like he's doing a decent job there. So, yeah, that's the kind of thing where you would think maybe his playing reputation, he might be able to create that sort of siege mentality, because he has got a bit of a fight. He's got that sort of grumpiness about him, hasn't he, Steve Morrison?
He wouldn't be afraid to call the fans out, and I think Harris said something in his presser, because Harris has made some comments recently saying that he's probably the only Millwall player that can sort of have a bit of a tiff and tap with the fans and get away with it.
Do you know what though? I think if you're a club legend, you sort of, it's like if you insult the fans, I think the fans know that it's not meant out of malice. It's sort of
out of love.
I think there's a culture at Millwall where you can sort of insult each other, but then say hello the next day. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's kind of like
group chat, mate. Yeah.
I'm not sure it would have worked under Steve Lomas if he tried to do the same thing, but it definitely worked under Harris. And I think Morrison, he would probably be one of the other very few players, ex-players, that if he took the manager job would get away with it. I just feel that the jump from League Two would be too much, and National League. Sorry, yeah. So I just worry that with Harris leaving the job that he's done, I just don't. I think that it's more important, as well as what the points you've made, Gab, about character, personality, getting the football club, and so on and so forth. It's about obviously getting the fans on board with the hire. If they did to go someone like Steve Morrison or Sadler, are they really better than Neil Harris and what Neil Harris has achieved? Are they really that different where this had to happen, this decision had to happen? I can understand it for a Robbins or a Steve Cooper or someone like that. I don't think the fan base are going to really accept it for a Sadler or someone like that, as opposed to, is this really the route we want to go down when the job Neil Harris has done? Is this really better than Neil?
Yeah, I don't know, because I suppose you would say when Neil Harris first got the job, would you have... would you
Yeah,
have
fair
kind
point.
of said the same thing? I often think, I just have this strong feeling that it's not about whether somebody's a good manager objectively, it's about whether they're a good Millwall manager. And so, I think you can get very good coach like Joe Edwards, for me, I think has potential to be a world-class coach, but he was a terrible Millwall manager. Whereas Neil Harris, I think, has would probably be in the market for a League One or League Two job outside Millwall, but he was a brilliant Millwall manager. So I think you almost, I think it's about getting the nuances of being a Millwall manager that's really important, more so than your objective ability as a manager. However strange that sounds, it's about the right fit. And so, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if you went for Steve Morrison, and he might not do well anywhere else in management, like he struggled everywhere else as a player, almost. But he
very,
did
very
it at
true.
Millwall, and you wonder whether he could be the same as a manager. I don't know.
Just
No,
on your comments about Neil there and sort of potentially not being able to succeed in other championship roles. I did see in the wake of sort of the announcement, several QPR and not QPR, Plymouth and Derby fans mentioning could he potentially be the man to step in and steer them clear like he did for us last season. Do you think you'd be able to go to clubs and succeed, or do you think maybe it's a bit of a one-trick pony in terms of he can do it at the Den, but maybe not so much somewhere else?
I question whether he could build something somewhere else, because I think Millwall are just one of the handful of. I just think Millwall are just such a unique club where there's a tremendous amount of loyalty at Millwall, and this is one of the things that makes me really admire you as a club from the outside. There's a real loyalty about the Millwall fan base that. You'll slag off each other, but then if anyone else attacks one of your own, you'll get your backs up, and you'll sort of. And there's that kind of culture at Millwall that I really admire, and I think it's probably missing elsewhere in the world, if you like, what Millwall have, and that kind of togetherness and sort of brother and sisterhood that Millwall have, that I think is really admirable. And I think it's why you just kind of you exist on a different. In a different way to other clubs. It's hard to explain from the outside, but I think you're a unique club, and therefore you kind of need a unique process to find people to lead the club, really.
No, excellent, Gab, and we appreciate all your thoughts on that. One last thing then, where do Millwall finish, and who goes up and who goes down? Sorry to put you on the spot again. Sorry, football fans, if Gab upsets you, it's only for us.
I think Millwall will finish about 16th or 17th. And I think in terms of promotion, I'm going to go Sunderland and Leeds with, who would I go with via the playoffs? Maybe West Brom via the playoffs. And then I think in terms of relegation, pretty worried about Plymouth Argyle. I think Portsmouth stay up. I think Cardiff might go down. And I need to find one more, don't I?
Oxford.
Who would I go? Yeah, maybe Oxford. Yeah, that's a good shout. I'll go with Oxford.
No, interesting. There you go. Millwall fans. Gab says that we stay up. And you know what? I don't think anybody would be unhappy with that, mate. You know, that after the job that happened last year, you're only as good as your last season. You always want to better your last season. And we ultimately, at one point, we was dead and buried. So stabilised season would be great. But Frankie, that's all from you, mate. That's all from me,
Yep.
My questions, Gab. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and talk with us today. Just tell us one more time, mate, what you got going on. Anything this weekend? Are you going to a game? Are you covering anything? And where can fans find you?
Yeah, I'm off to Cheltenham against Morecambe this weekend, so looking forward to that one. Once again, you can subscribe to my stuff on YouTube at EFL Debate, same with Spotify, and you can follow me on Twitter, or X, it's now called, at Gab Sutton.
Excellent. Appreciate you very much. Frankie, any final thoughts before we sign off?
No, just thanks for having me, and best of luck for the rest of the season, and hope you get the right manager in. So, best wishes.
Perfect. Frank, from yourself?
No, nothing from me, mate. Again, just to echo what Jay said, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate the insight. Good to have you.
Excellent. And everybody, this show will be going out as a podcast. It'll be going out on YouTube and all socials, hopefully very, very, very soon. Look out for Gab's channel, Gab's stuff on YouTube and what he does so much for the EFL. He's always a very, very busy man, so we appreciate him taking the time today. Be sure to like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and we will all see you on the next one.